we know most people come here who are in your position for fundraising. But what message would you have to Texans who are still trying to make a decision in this race?
I think the focus really, for me, is we can either have more of the same or we can go in a new direction. More of the same is not just Joe Biden. More of the same is Donald Trump. We have to acknowledge 70% of Americans don't want to see a Trump-Biden rematch. 59% of Americans think Donald Trump and Joe Biden are too old to be president. Both of those men put us trillions of dollars in debt that our kids are never going to forgive them for. And we have to start focusing on someone who can serve 8 years with the hard work and the discipline to get it done. Mm-hmm. And when I look at, I voted for Donald Trump twice. I was proud to serve America in his administration. But the truth is, chaos follows him. And we can't be a country in disarray and a world on fire and go through 4 more years of chaos. We won't survive it.
Do you ever, this is something I worry about, if he is reelected, all the people who were willing to work in his first administration and who saw what that was like are gone, and they won't do that again, I'm guessing, most of them. So who would he find enough people to even work with him the second time around?
He'll find people that want to do that. The problem is if you don't find people that push back on his worst tendencies, that's the dangerous part. The reason I got along fine with him in the administration, the reason I got out of there without a tweet, was because I told him the truth. If he was doing something good, I rallied. I wanted America to look strong. If he was doing something wrong, I showed up in his office or I picked up the phone. He always called me back. And I would say, you can't do this, but instead you could do X, Y, or Z. I always gave him options. And he would say, well, how do you see that playing out? And he knows I saved him on a lot of things. The problem I worry about, and we saw this in the last couple of years of his administration, is if no one tells him no, then he goes off his worst tendencies. And that's the concern that I have.
Did you really get out without a tweet?
I did.
Wow.
And not only that, I got out with a news conference where he said I was the best UN ambassador that anybody had ever seen. So it was.
Times have changed.
Yes.
He's not striking that tone anymore. So what is at this point? Let's be real. What you're willing to lose race after race. Trump has had some fun with none of the above. You lost to none of the above. Okay. Why are you willing to stay in this? And what is your path to victory? Are you playing a long game to 2028? Are you thinking there may be a conviction?
I mean, we have a country to save. I don't want my kids to live like this. I mean, you look at it, you feel it. It's the anger, it's the division, it's everything. It's the debt, it's the open border. It's the fact that only 31% of 8th graders in our country are proficient in reading. It's the lawlessness in all of our cities. It's the wars happening around the world. We can't get this wrong. And the reality is, if you're looking at a primary, Trump lost in 2018, he lost in 2020, he lost in 2022. But look at what happened last week. He lost his case on immunity. We lost a vote on the border. We lost a vote on Israel. The RNC chair lost her job, and his fingerprints were on all of that. Now we lose the New York election. Everything he touches, he loses. How many more times do we have to lose before we say maybe he's the problem? That's the issue. And so a lot of people are like, you're losing, you're losing. I would counter that and say, there were 14 people in this race. I defeated a dozen of those fellas. We got one more left. They said I wouldn't make it to Iowa. I had 2% in Iowa. I finished with 20%. They said I was 30 points down the night of the New Hampshire election. I finished with 43% of the vote. We are staying competitive. The reason we're here in Texas doing a rally, this is an important state. I know that the party that gets rid of their 80-year-old candidate is the party that will win. Guaranteed. We just have to be smart enough to do that. And we also have to understand, look at what happens when Donald Trump goes off script now. Look at what he talks about. Did you see what he talked about with NATO? I mean, not only did you say that anyone not pulling their weight in NATO would not be defended by the United States, He took it a step further and said he would encourage Putin to invade them. NATO's been a 75-year success story. We haven't had any wars during that time. And you just said you're going to side with a thug where 500,000 people have died or been wounded because of his invasion in Ukraine. You decided to side with a man who kills his political opponents. You decided to side with a man who arrested Evan Gersovich just for doing his journalistic job. That's who you're going to side with?
And why are so many Americans willing to tolerate that?
Because the president and Congress have failed. Don't blame the American people for not understanding why Ukraine matters, not understanding why Israel matters, not understanding why we care about Taiwan. Don't blame them, because the president and Congress have never told them. They've never explained to them about why they should care. And what's worse, they took it a step further. They said, do we support Ukraine or do we support Israel? Do we support Israel or do we secure the border? They just lied to the American people, because that's a false premise. The American people don't have to choose among those. A president and Congress has to choose national security. A president and Congress has to choose preventing war. A president and Congress has to choose protecting Americans, and they're not doing that right now.
There are some people who don't agree with Donald Trump on anything except the fact that he is really adamant about keeping America out of war. When they listen to you talk, they might be concerned that you lean on the war hawk side. You might lead us into another Iraq. What would be your response to that?
It's the total opposite. I'm the wife of a combat veteran. The last thing we ever want is for our men and women to go to war. I obsess over preventing war. The reason Ukraine, I don't think we should give cash to any country, friend or enemy, because I don't think you can follow it and you can't hold it accountable. The reason I think we need to give equipment and ammunition to Ukraine is because dictators always tell us what they're going to do. Putin said once he takes Ukraine, Poland and the Baltics are next. Those are NATO countries that immediately puts us at war. I'm trying to prevent war. Russia right now, Putin has got forces now surrounding the Baltics, because when Ukraine's over, he's going in. And guess what? That means we may have to go in. I don't want that. We can't afford that. That's what people need to know, is this is about preventing war, not starting war. You will never see me. My husband is a combat veteran, served in Afghanistan, is deployed now. My brother was in Desert Storm. You never want your loved ones to go to war.
So you are a formidable candidate who happens to be a woman. If you are elected, you would be the first woman president. What would that mean to America in practice?
For me, I don't think about it like that. As you know, it was the same thing when I became the first female governor of South Carolina. I was glad that it was out of the way. I was glad that no longer was that something people talked about. It should be normal. I just want it to be normal, right? And so when they stop saying, oh, but we haven't had this, or you would be the first this, I don't want there to be any firsts. I want there to be seconds and thirds and fourths. I want people to see that. I remember when I was growing up in a small rural town in South Carolina, I always wanted to see someone that looked like me in a position. And I didn't see anybody that looked like me. I didn't see anybody brown, and I didn't see any women. And so I would go to school, and in third grade, I would check out books on women leaders. And the only books they had were on first ladies. And I would read those, and I loved how they were partners with their husbands. A lot of times they came up with the ideas. A lot of times they were the sounding boards. I just want women to know that all of this is open for them. But I also don't want to just be the first female president. I want to be the right first female president. I think that's more important than just saying that I was the first.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I grew up in a small city in the South, in Mobile, Alabama, and my family did experience some racism, and you've written about that in your own family's life. What would you tell voters who are immigrants or from they're people of color, brown, or some kind of minority? What would you tell them? Why should they vote in the Republican Party? Why should they vote for a Republican when the party tends to underplay the enduring role of racism in the U.S.?
I don't think the party underplays it. I think it's coming to it from a different premise. Yes, did I face racism growing up? Yes, we did. We were the only Indian family in that small town. You know what that feels like. We weren't white enough to be white. We weren't black enough to be black. And I remember when I would get teased on the playground and I would come home, my mom would always say, your job is not to show them how you're different. Your job is to show them how you're similar. And it's amazing how that lesson on the playground played throughout my life, whether it was the corporate world or as governor or as ambassador. When you're faced with a challenge, if you first talk about the things you have in common, people let their guard down, and then you can get towards a solution. What I would tell everyone is the reason you want to vote in this primary is because we need to right the ship. We need to right the ship on the fact that we stop deciding who's good and who's bad, who's right and who's wrong. I want this to be about everybody. Republicans have lost the last 7 out of 8 popular votes for president. That's nothing to be proud of. We should want to win the majority of Americans. But you don't win the majority of Americans when you're pushing people away. I talk to everyone. When I governed to lift up everyone. When I was at the UN, we focused on everyone. We didn't pick a side. You have Donald Trump the day after New Hampshire. He said anybody that supports Nikki Haley is barred permanently from MAGA. Think about that. A president of the United States, your job is to bring people in, not push people out of your club. That's the problem we have in politics right now. This should be about all of us. And I want to get people invested to where they bring out the best of themselves. And I'll give you the perfect example was when we had that shooting at Mother Emanuel Church. The whole state could have fallen apart. It was on the heels of Ferguson. We didn't have riots, we had vigils. We didn't have protests, we had hugs. A leader doesn't judge either side. A leader brings out the best in people and gets them to go forward. We haven't had that in a long time. That's what we need to have.
Would you encourage Democrats in Texas to cross over and vote in the Republican primary?
Well, I will tell you, anybody can vote in the primary as long as they didn't vote in the Democrat primary. This is about, do you want more of the same or do you want something different? And I think it's time for a new generational conservative leader. That's what I'm looking for. When people come into our rallies, we'll have 1,000 people there tonight. I don't ask who's Republican, who's Democrat, who's independent. But what I do talk about is how we need to get our debt down and get our economy back on track. I do talk about the fact we've got to get our kids reading again and back to the basics in education. I talk about the fact that we need to secure our borders with no more excuses. I talk about the fact that we need law and order in our cities and we need to prevent war. All of those things, I don't think those are partisan. I think those are American values.
There are some things that people would disagree adamantly with you that are considered partisan, today at least, not always. One is abortion. Mm-hmm. I know you identify as pro-life, but in Texas, I'm sure you know, in some of these states, including Texas, the way that our abortion ban has been implemented is not pro-life. Women's lives are in danger. We have a law that the doctors don't even understand. And we have a lot of litigation surrounding that, and our lawmakers refuse to change it. That's not pro-life, in my opinion and many people's opinion. So where do you stand on this ambiguous laws, and also this point that some people are making that we should have a national ban?
So you have to, I think it's important to go back and look how we got here. Prior to 1973, we had 46 state laws that all dealt with abortion differently. And in 1973, you had unelected justices throw out those 46 state laws and say you could have abortion anytime, anywhere, for any reason. I think a wrong was made right when they said unelected justices shouldn't decide this, it should be in the hands of the people. That's where I think it's supposed to be. Now, yes, I am unapologetically pro-life, not because the Republican Party tells me to be, but because my husband was adopted. I had trouble having both of my children. But I don't judge anyone for being pro-choice any more than I want you to judge me for being pro-life. So now we have states voting. Some states are going more pro-life. I welcome that. Some are going more on the choice side. I wish that wasn't the case, but the people decided. When you're talking about a ban, and first of all, what happened in Texas, especially when you pass something, be clear enough to know when you have to fix it. And Texas had an issue where it was clear that they've got to make some adjustments and fix it. And they should be willing to do that. I think every state is going to have to make tweaks to it, and they should be clear enough to say they're going to do that. When it comes to a federal law, we have to be honest with the American people. The only way a federal law happens is if you have a majority of the House, 60 Senate votes, and a signature of a president. We haven't had 60 Republicans in over 100 years. We might have 45 pro-life senators. So no Republican president can ban abortions any more than a Democrat president can ban these state laws. So where do we go from here? Why don't we find consensus? Let's agree on banning late-term abortions. Let's agree on encouraging good quality adoptions. Let's say doctors and nurses who don't believe in abortion shouldn't have to perform them. Let's say contraception should be accessible. And let's say no state law should say to a woman who gets an abortion that she's going to jail or getting the death penalty. Let's start there. I'm going to humanize this issue. No more demonizing this issue. I had a roommate in college who was raped. I wouldn't wish on anyone to go through what she went through, wondering if she was pregnant. Everybody has a story. We have to be respectful of those stories. Our overall goal should be, how do we save as many babies as possible and support as many moms as possible? Democrats have put fear in women, and that is incredibly wrong. Republicans have used judgment with women, and that is incredibly wrong. There's no place for fear or judgment when you're talking about something this personal.
Where is that line for you? What's late term? Where would you drive?
Wherever we get 60 Senate votes. And you can look at it now, 60 Senate votes is going to be hard to come by on anything. Whatever it is, wherever they come down, that will save more babies and support more moms. But it should be wherever we get the 60 Senate votes. But other than that, stop talking about something that's not practical. And that's the reason that yes, would I love for everybody to go have 15 weeks? Of course I would. It's not going to happen, so why go and scare people to thinking that that's an option? It's not an option. So let's just talk about what is an option and then focus from there.
If you don't get this nomination, would you even consider running as a third party?
No, I'm a Republican. I'm a Republican. I don't know what good that does at that point. I think you have to kind of just be true to what you're trying to do and do it through that path, not just jump and try and figure out other paths to do it.
The situation with the border, obviously, a lot of Texans are very concerned about it on both sides of the aisle. You've seen how our governor's handling it. How would you, as president, handle the situation? You seem to have some compassion for the immigrant journey experience. Your family came legally, but how would you balance that with the fact that people are breaking the law every single day in droves?
I mean, I think that, first of all, as governor, I passed the toughest illegal immigration law in the country. President Obama sued us over it, and we won. We are a country of laws. The second we stop being a country of laws, we give up everything this country was founded on. The way I would handle it is we would take what we did in South Carolina and go national with it. Do a national E-Verify that requires every business have to show that the people they hire are in this country legally. Defund sanctuary cities once and for all. You can't have safe havens or they'll keep coming. Put 25,000 Border Patrol and ICE agents on the ground and let them do their job. That's not happening right now. Go back to the Remain in Mexico policy so that no one even steps foot on U.S. soil. And instead of catch and release, go to catch and deport. I saw when I was at the United Nations, the cartels are the ones that are winning. The smugglers are the ones that are winning because they get paid enormous amounts of money to bring these people over. And you see kids, even if they leave their shoe, they're left behind. We've got to make sure they know don't come. You know, when President Trump had his border issue, because he had one as well, I was on the ground in Honduras and Guatemala. And at the time, we knew they were coming from there in El Salvador. And the reason they were coming was because of gangs, because of drugs, and they were trying to figure out how to and because of trafficking as well. We worked with them, and our military went and trained them on how to combat the gangs. And then we put drug boats on the water so that the drugs wouldn't go. And we told them, we will continue this partnership, but you have to keep people and let them process from here. That's what stopped the flow. You have to go to the heart of why are they coming from that place in the first place and start to really go towards that. Then you have to let them know it's not worth making the trek. Biden just gave 500,000 Venezuelans temporary protective status. I saw what happens when you do that. They pick up the phone and call their family members and say, come on. You're incentivizing them to come. He now just gave 6,000 Palestinians. He's not going to deport them. He's protected them from deportation. You don't know. You haven't vetted them. You don't know if there's Hamas. You don't know who it is. It's irresponsible to allow anyone into the United States that you have not vetted. The job of a president is to protect the safety of Americans. He's not doing that right now.
Do you think it's irresponsible for a governor to block the Border Patrol?
You have to look at what he's doing. He's putting up that wire fence. I mean, come on. If this is about the fact you have to deter them from coming. I've been 400 miles down that border. It is awful what I saw. Mounds of shoes, mounds of clothes, paraphernalia, rape areas that the women and girls have to walk through. You can't have this continue to happen. The drugs, the fentanyl, everything that's happening. And those ranchers didn't ask for this. When they get up in the morning, they go see if anybody died crossing the fence. They pick up whatever little kids were left behind and turn them over to Border Patrol. Border Patrol, sheriffs have said they round up as many as they can before 7 a.m. They take them over to Border Patrol. Border Patrol documents them and releases them until their court date years from now. They are not vetted. It just takes one person for a 9/11 moment. America's acting like it's September 10th. We better remember what September 12th felt like.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I do. So you mentioned, the importance of law, and I think something that makes this moment in the border particularly difficult is that it is within international law for people to cross illegally and claim asylum and enter into the asylum process. So I'm wondering, how would you address that aspect, what some lawyers have called an attractive nuisance to cross illegally?
Asylum laws have been we want to have asylum laws. We know that there are people who come here who are persecuted. That's happened for years. The problem is they're not following them, and they're incredibly too weak. Because right now people are asking for asylum and they're letting them go without properly vetting to see what it is. You can't have these Chinese nationalists coming. You can't have all of these other people coming and you say that they're claiming asylum. That's not the case. This is not the same situation. 8.5 million people are not claiming asylum. 8.5 million people want to come to America. That's bottom line. That's what it is. We have to protect Americans. I'm telling you, we can't wait for something bad to happen before we realize we need to do something.
So Republicans say this, and then, they let a deal fall through.
So in the border bill that they had, a couple of things with that. It strengthened asylum laws, which would have made a big difference in what we're talking about. 3 million illegal immigrants came under Trump's watch, which had we had these stronger asylum laws, that wouldn't have happened. But it was weak when it came to, it didn't have remain in Mexico, and it had a 5,000 person threshold. If you've got to wait for 5,000 people, that's 5,000 people you're letting in without protecting. Two things should have happened. One is, Congress needs to get in a room and figure this out, and they should not be going on break without doing that. This is too big of an issue for them not to solve it. And Trump doesn't need to come in there and say, don't pass this until November. We can't wait until November. That's unbelievable that something like that would happen. Congress needs to do their job. They love to peacock on TV. They love to talk about all these things that are wrong. Get in there and make it right. They have the opportunity to do that. And the people are tired of waiting on this. It's not like something else is wrong. And I heard them say, oh, but Biden could do this now. No, strengthening those asylum laws needs to happen through a bill. Making sure that we go and protect that border, it needs to happen in a bill. Everybody in D.C. is to blame for this. Republicans, Democrats, the president, Congress, all of them. Because there is no excuse for going one more day without securing that border.
You mentioned remain in Mexico, and I'm curious, given that it's an election year in Mexico, how do you anticipate making that work with Mexico, to get their agreement to take all these migrants who maybe aren't even Mexican nationals?
I mean, we did it before, we have to do it again. This is part of having a partnership. You know, I mean, we should be partners with Mexico. We should talk to them about what it is, but we should go to the origins of what's happening. And when people start to see how hard this is, they won't make the trek. But we do need to partner with Mexico to make sure that that happens. And we do need to also talk to them about the fentanyl flow and the fentanyl production that's happening on their side of the border. So those are all things that you have to talk to them about and get that done. But it's not that they won't do it, but we do have to talk to them about the importance of doing it, because we can't let them come into America.
One of the frustrating things to us, and I think we've talked to Representative Crenshaw about it, he's concerned too, but it's, you know, fentanyl, some of it is coming from there, but guns are coming from here. There's seemingly a free flow of guns that are coming even from the Houston area down to Mexico, and, you know, supplying the cartels. Is that something you're aware of or concerned about?
Well, first of all, the fentanyl, we need to go to the origin, which is China. I mean, China knows exactly what they're doing when they're sending that fentanyl over. Number one cause of death for adults 18 to 45 is fentanyl. When it comes to the guns, look, that's the deal you make with both countries. Mexico, right now, they're intimidated by the cartels. That's why they haven't done anything. We've got to go and work together to, one, make sure that they don't get more guns, but also we need to take out their production sites where the fentanyl's happening. And when you've had enough Americans die of fentanyl, then the Iraq, Afghanistan, and Vietnam wars combined, something needs to happen. We can't just continue to allow Americans to die this way. And so, yes, we can deal with them with the guns, but they have to deal with us on the fentanyl.
When you're running against God, as you are, in some people's minds, is that you know, a security risk to you? I wonder if you sometimes feel like you're in danger. He's got some pretty shady people on his side.
I mean, yes, I mean, we're dealing with security issues, we're dealing with threats. That has been something that we deal with, but that doesn't slow me down. That's not going to stop me. We have a country to save, and I am determined to do it. And we are going to keep fighting every step of the way. I'm not going anywhere. This matters. You look at the fact today, they said he's got his first criminal court date, March 25th. March and April, he's going to be dealing with one case. May and June, he's dealing with another case. This is not going to stop. He has already said himself he's going to spend more time in a courtroom than he is on the campaign trail. That's problem number one.
If he asked you to be VP, would you consider that?
I don't want to be vice president. I don't want any position. I want to save this country. I don't want my kids to live like this, and I am determined to get this right. We have to do this for the sake of all Americans. We've got to do this.
So you've ruled it out?
Yeah, I mean, it's just not something, I've said in every way possible, I don't want any political position, including vice president, period.
Do you feel that there's something that you can tell people who are Trump voters on the campaign trail that actually moves them, that actually persuades them?
If you want to win, which Republicans very much want to win, and if you want to get our country back on track, you have to win to do it. And if you look at every one of those general election polls, Trump is down on Biden, 5.7 points on his best day, margin of error. I defeat Biden by up to 17 points. That's bigger than a presidency. That's House, that's Senate, that's governorships, that's school boards. But that's a mandate going into DC if you win by double digits, to stop the wasteful spending and get our economy back on track, to get our kids reading again and go back to the basics in education, to secure our borders with no more excuses, to have a strong America where we prevent war. We can do that. It is that kind of a win. But he spent $50 million in campaign contributions on his own personal court cases. Now you go and see he's taking over the RNC, putting an election denier and his daughter-in-law to be co-chairs of the RNC. He's putting his campaign manager to run it. Why? To pay his legal fees, because he's running out. The RNC is now broke. How does anybody think Republicans are going to win with that?
A lot of Republicans
do.
He
can't win.
They're staying by him.
He can't win. And they can stand by him, but I have said from the very beginning, don't complain about what happens in a general election if you don't play in this primary.
Do you think it's hyperbolic to say that this election is existential for this country, for democracy?
I think every election they say this is the one that matters. But it's hard not to look at this and see the economic situation that we're in, the education situation that we're in, the national security issue that we're in, and not see the dangers of what is ahead. The idea that we are left with two 80-year-olds that are going to run for president who are diminished. Biden, we know, is diminished. You can look at him from 2 years ago and see he's diminished. There's nobody disputing that. Trump is also diminished. He's not who he was 2016. I mean, look at the other day, he went off on me 4 or 5 times saying that I was in charge of security at the Capitol. He was confused. When he goes off the teleprompter, he's unhinged. You can't look at that and say, that's the right way to go. We have to get someone in for 8 years, period. We've got to get someone that doesn't have vendettas, that doesn't have issues, that can just go without any negativity and go forward and start to right this ship.
Some people think Trump would be in for 8 years. I mean, what are your concerns about his authoritarian tendencies?
I mean, look, I think if it's any indication, I mean, look at what he did in Nevada. Look at what he's doing with the RNC. I mean, right now, before he's even been named, nominee in the convention, look at what he's doing. I mean, he's not making any bones about what he plans on doing. He's talked about the vendettas. The night of New Hampshire, when I got 43% and he was upset, what did he do? He talked about revenge. The next day, he said everybody was barred permanently if they supported me. The next day after that, he tried to be named the presumptive nominee. He has done everything he can to control the situation. And he wants to control it because if you look at the thing that bothers me is all of that. At no point did he talk about the American people. At no point did he talk about how we were going to fix the country. At no point did he talk about the plight of what's happening with American families right now. He only talked about himself. And everything he does comes back to him. And that's the problem, is it's just not about him.
How do you explain his continued strength in the Republican Party?
I think that, it's many in the Republican Party came in because they felt unheard and unseen. That was a truth. That was something that they didn't feel like anybody would fight for them. Then they go and they see that he fought for 4 years and never got a moment's peace or an ounce of credit. So this is a loyalty pledge back to him that they feel like since he fought for them, they need to fight for him. That's what that is. But what I have told them is he can't win. And if you know he can't win, that's what people come to me and say, I voted for him twice, but we can't lose again. And that's what this comes down to.
Ambassador Haley, so I'm asking this question on behalf of our readers in particular. What can you do as president to improve the lives of Houstonians? Would you invest in Houston? Will Houston be a priority for you?
I think what's important to Houstonians is important to a lot of Americans. I think first, we've watched Republicans and Democrats waste money. I mean, you go back to the $2.2 trillion COVID stimulus bill that they passed with no accountability. We now have 80 million Americans on Medicaid, 42 million Americans on food stamps. Republicans opened up pet projects for the first time in 10 years, pushing through 7,000 of them a year ago. And while they're doing all this spending, 1 in 6 American families can't afford their utility bill. 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 50% of American families can't afford diapers. And so our focus is very much going to be, how do we get the economy back on track? We'll start by clawing back the $100 billion of unspent COVID dollars that are still out there. Instead of 87,000 IRS agents going after Middle America, we'll go after the hundreds of billions of dollars of COVID fraud. 1 out of every $7 was spent fraudulently. If 8% of our budget is interest, quit borrowing. Cut up the credit cards. Your Houstonians have to balance their budget every day. I had to balance our budget as governor. Why is Congress the only group that refuses to balance the budget? We'll stop the spending, we'll stop the borrowing. We'll eliminate their pet projects, and I'll veto any spending bill that doesn't go back to pre-COVID levels. The second thing is we need to open up the middle class. And we're watching the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. We'll do that by eliminating the federal gas and diesel tax in this country. We'll cut taxes on the middle class and simplify the brackets. And we will make the small business tax cuts permanent. Small businesses are the heartbeat of our economy. We need to start acting like it. I think from that standpoint, American families want to know that we can do something about that. We're going to open up the energy industry. I mean, you look right now, the EPA cares more about sagebrush lizards than they do about whether we can afford our utility bill. If we get the EPA out of the way, we start up the pipelines, we speed up permitting, we start to focus on nuclear, we start to focus on all of the above energy, we can actually turn our energy sector into an economic powerhouse. That will help us pay down debt. That will help us get inflation down. That will strengthen every American family. But the other thing I want to do is I want to take as many federal programs as I can and send them down to the state level. And that way we're reducing the size of the federal government, but we're empowering people on the ground. So think education, think healthcare, think welfare, think mental health. If we took it out of DC and put it into the states where they could customize it to them, the difference that would make to every Houstonian family, but to every American family, in terms of making sure the resources go to the ground where it should be. There's a lot of things we can do to empower families, but we've got to start working towards that. And then making things safe, making streets safer, go back to law and order, making sure we secure the border, preventing war. All of these things can be done, but we have to stop making it about a person and we have to start making it about the American people.
Texas is an oil and gas state, but it's also on the forefront of climate change. What would you tell people about how you would balance those?
I think climate change is real, and I think we need to acknowledge that. But I think what's important is understand that we need to look at the transition, not look at it in extremes. So it's wrong to not acknowledge climate change is real, and it's wrong to say everybody has to drive an electric car by 2033. I mean, that in itself doesn't make sense because we don't even have the infrastructure. And I'm not talking about charging stations. Electric cars are heavy. If we were to do that by 2033, our roads and bridges wouldn't hold it. Not to mention 70% of the batteries come from China. Why are you going to give a windfall to our #1 national security threat? Be smart and let's look at it in transition. First, we're not going to get emissions down until we start holding China and India to account. They have to start pulling their weight. America has always done what it's supposed to. That we need to get with our allies and start saying China and India have to pull their weight. The second thing is look at things that can transition. You now have nuclear fusion. You have different innovators that can come up that can do things. Your producers want to help us do that. Stop demonizing energy producers and start partnering with them because they want to help when it comes to the environment, but they don't want to be forced, they don't want to be mandated, and they don't want to be slowed down. They want to be part of the solution.
Are you talking about a carbon tariff when you're talking about India and China? How do you hold them to account?
I mean, look, they had the Paris Climate Agreement, right? And the reason I pulled us out of the Paris Climate Agreement is not because I didn't believe in the environment. It's because I saw what the rules were. America had all of these mandates on our businesses. And China's plan for the Paris Climate Agreement was they would deal with it in 10 years. I've dealt with China to know enough to know 10 years never comes. It was an unfair scenario. If we're going to talk about the environment across the world, everybody needs to be held to the same standards. You don't get to put some at one place and some at the other. Everybody's got to pull their weight when it comes to that. And China and India haven't done that because no one has made them do that. And they have to start doing that.
You talk about pushing power to the states. As you know, Texas is an ornery state. We've talked about even secession. It's in our state GOP platform, I think. As president, how would you react to Texas secession?
I think, first of all, what Americans really are looking for is freedom, right? Freedom to live and do and be whatever they want to be without government in the way.
Even if it's not Americans?
What do you mean?
I mean, if Texas secedes, it becomes its own country.
Well, we know Texas is not going to. Texas has talked about that for a long time, but the reality is we all know that they're not going to. But at the same time, let's look at the fact what they want to do is be free. They don't want to be told how to live. They don't want to be told what they can and can't do. They don't want any economic mandates. They just want to have freedom, and we should want them to have that. But there's ways we can do that that empower them, and I'll give you a couple examples when I talk about sending resources to the states. First of all, presidents only meet with their governors once a year. I will meet with our governors once a quarter, Republican and Democrat, with the sole focus of when those resources go down, let's support them in how to do it. So when I became governor, we had 11% unemployment, and we had thousands of people on welfare. I went and took those on welfare, and many of that was generational welfare. Parents, grandparents, they had always been on welfare. I took them and partnered them with businesses. And I told my businesses, if you will take this person and train them for X number of weeks, I will pay for that. It's the amount of money they'd be sitting on the couch. And I said, and at the end, you decide if you want to hire them. We moved 35,000 people from welfare to work. We had family celebrations because kids for the first time saw what their parents had accomplished. And the parents were so proud. But more than that, it's not that they didn't want to work. You have to connect the dots. They didn't know where to get the training. We did the same thing in our prison systems. I wanted to know how people got in, what happened to them when they got there, and what happened when they left. And I reformed the whole place. We put computer skills in there. We taught them how to build a resume. We did financial planning, family planning, faith-based if they wanted it. But we put equipment behind the fence. Now when someone leaves the fence, they've got a job to go to the next day. South Carolina has the lowest recidivism rate in the country. When you lift up the least of these, that's when you're making real magic. That's when you're making long-term changes. Those are the things that we need to encourage states to do. Because when every state can do that, you're giving everybody another chance at life. And so that's the focus, but give them the freedom to be able to do it. Don't mandate. You know, the problem, you look at what happened during COVID. Why are people so angry and resentful? You told small businesses, who are survivors by nature, that they couldn't open their doors. Let them decide if they wanted to open doors. You told consumers who want to be able to live that they couldn't go in those doors if they were open. Consumers should have been able to decide if they wanted to make the choice to go in. When I was governor, I over-communicated. I told South Carolinians everything I knew. I'll do that as president. And I educated them so they could make the best decisions. That's the focus of what a leader does, is you go and you give them everything they can so that they can protect their families and know what they need to do. Now you've got a president in D.C. who don't think that the American people need to know anything. They think they know what's best. This is Republicans and Democrats doing this. People just want to be free, and they want to be able to trust what government's telling them. And there's been a lot of lost trust that's happened over the last decade.
So your party's been hijacked by extremists, certainly in Texas and to a certain degree nationally. And some of that is and there are extremists on both sides, of course, but some of that is the Republican Party's own making through redistricting. I like to ask this question of Republicans, because right now there's the power that you're getting from redistricting in a state, especially like this. But when you look at the long game and how it's affecting our democracy, do you ever think that as president you could support reform that would give more power back to people and make sure that we get back to the standard of one person, one vote?
I mean, it would be nice if we could get to a situation where we could, I mean, you look at it now, it's a jigsaw puzzle. It's ridiculous. I mean, we all see that, whether it's Republican or whether it's Democrat. And in Democrat states, you see that they do the gerrymandering, and Republican states, you see they do the gerrymandering. Whether we can ever get back to a better place or not, I don't know. Whether people would have the will to do that, that requires trust. That's a trust issue. That's nothing more than a trust issue. Republicans don't trust Democrats to do the right thing. Democrats don't trust Republicans to do the right thing. So, you know, we would have to look at it and see how best to do that. But it would be, I mean, that's a great dream to have, is that we can suddenly get back to where people have to actually fight for something. They have to actually earn the support of a voter.
I mean, it takes a sacrifice, but California got it done. And I don't know. I just wish somebody on the national level who's running for president would see that, because this affects everybody. Democracy is not working the way it's supposed to work on either side because of this issue. So, there. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for taking
We've
the
enjoyed
time. I
it.
appreciate it, of course. Thank you.